All right, welcome back, ladies and gents. If you're here, you should be learning something about imperialism in your classes. And today we're going to take you through the Spanish-American War. So it's a famous cartoon here about who was kind of in control of Cuba at that time, and that would be the Spanish government. And as we can see, there's a lot of anarchy going on there. And we're not talking about Spanish rule. We're talking about Spanish misrule. So let's get it going here. So we want to take a look at especially causes and results as we continue to move. So the Americans had certain business interests in Cuba. They spent over $50 million in terms of extracting sugar from their sugar plantations down in Cuba. So most of the sugar was actually imported to the United States. Well, there was a Cuban revolution against the Spanish rule in the late 1800s, 1895, and that really threatened the American interest because the Spanish government really was going to put the clamps down on this revolution. So you have kind of the Cubans down here saying, hey, we need some help, we're looking for freedoms just like you guys did, and Uncle Sam's got to kind of make that decision. Should America get involved in Cuba? And that is, we had $50 million to do so, right? We wanted to control our sugar resources. So there's a slight humanitarian reason going on once we found out what the Spanish were doing. So number one, we really sympathized with the Cubans because they were fighting against an imperial power and they wanted to gain their independence. Pretty much the same thing the Americans did. Well, we were actually disgusted with the Spanish military commander, the dictator down there, is Valeriano Weyler, and his nickname was the Butcher. What did he do? He imprisoned hundreds of thousands of Cuban civilians in what were called reconcentration camps. 30% of them will actually die from disease or starvation. All right, so we're going to look at the numbers. About 200,000 Cuban civilians died at the hands of the Spanish leader, the Butcher. So the humanitarian cause here, should we get involved in Cuba to help these people? Because that is what the Spanish government was doing to them. Well, another reason we can add to the actual cause was getting involved here would allow America to expand. So Teddy Roosevelt, Henry Cabot Lodge, and the Secretary of State John Hay were all expansionists. And they said, hey, if we got into this war, it offered us a severe opportunity to take territory from a weakened Spain. So you have some vocabulary there. If you want to pause that screen and get that for your worksheet, that's great. I'm going to keep cruising. Another cause was jingoism, and that is kind of super patriotism or a form of kind of aggressive nationalism. So what the jingoists said in America was, hey, we should get involved and help these Cuban people. So we're going to take aggressive actions, and it really created a warlike mood inside of America, and people were really clamoring and wanting the government to go to war, all right? This is kind of what you'll see at the end of 1898 after the Spanish-American War. You have the American eagle spreading their wings all the way to Puerto Rico and Samoans and the Philippines and Hawaii, and you'll see that towards the end of the war. So another cause would be yellow journalism. So I'm going to introduce you to two famous newspaper men now, right? William Randolph Hearst. His newspaper was the New York Morning Journal, and then Joseph Pulitzer, his newspaper was the New York World. And these two newspaper editors, they pretty much competed with each other to sell newspapers. So whoever had the biggest grandiose headline was able to make a lot of money. So what do? These are the guys that printed the most sensational stories, printed the most pictures that they could find about what was happening in the Cuban Revolution. So what we have here is this term called yellow journalism. They were definitely telling the truth, but they took that truth and maybe exaggerated it a little bit or distorted the events to get people to believe America should, in fact, get involved. So we have a famous little cartoon here of Pulitzer and Hearst. They're acting like children because they're competing, but what do? They're building these blocks, and what is it leading towards? Going to war. Right, famous cartoon there, right? So there you go. You got your Joseph Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst. So there's Pulitzer and Hearst, right? And Hearst actually said to one of his newspaper men there, the photographer, he says to Frederick Remington, hey, if you give me the pictures, I'll make sure there's a war, right? famous letter known as the Lôme letter. All right, and it is from the Spanish minister Enrique de Lôme. He actually writes this letter to the United States, and in that letter, he called President McKinley weak. He called him like a stupid politician, and that kind of makes us mad. It's not the only reason why we might go to war, but it definitely adds to the fray, right? The letter is printed in the New York Journal. It's going to make it hard for the president to hold off public demands for war, right? I mean, it's going to make it very hard because, I mean, he would really look like a chump if the public wants to go to war. Here's the Spanish calling you weak, and you do nothing about it. Once again, so McKinley's back is pretty much against the war, so against the wall here. So McKinley here, a low politician, weak and catering to the rabble. There he is, Enrique de Lôme. Right, nice job, buddy. He really got us going. What did McKinley do? Well, you know, after this letter and $50 million in sugar, we sent a United States battleship, the USS Maine, to Havana Harbor. And we set this ship up in the harbor to keep track of our products, to make sure that our sugar is taken care of. So, you know, the Maine explodes, and it really is the reason for going to war. So I'm going to fix this here for you just so you got it, right? Sinking of the Maine, right? The USS Maine explodes in the harbor of Havana, Cuba. And, well, what's aboard that ship? 266 Americans die. Spain is going to get blamed for the attack. Whether they did it or not, it's still unknown today. The investigation later was not able to determine. So we still, to this day, don't know if Spain actually did that, but they're certainly going to get the blame, right? So the slogan at the time is, remember the Maine, to hell with Spain, right? So if you need that for your sheet, remember the Maine, to hell with Spain. So there it is. Yeah, there it is. And then what do we do? There's your propaganda, right? We have the funeral. We have our Navy going, and out here, you know, we make the enemy look like a barbarian, right? Oh, nice little pin right there. Remember the Maine. So we actually fight the war. It only lasts a few months, so it's going to happen fast. Spain agreed to an armistice in Cuba. Within the first couple months, we blockaded Cuba and we took care of business. McKinley says, hey, let's declare war. Congress approves a little amendment that says, hey, even after this war is over, the Teller Amendment, the United States is not going to annex Cuba, right? We're going to kind of take care of them. So there's the little slogan, Cuba Libre, a free Cuba, right? The war lasted a measly 4 months. It was fought in the Caribbean and the Pacific, wherever the Spanish were. There were 2,446 Americans who died, but when you look at the numbers, only 400 were combat deaths. So a lot of the other Americans died of infections or diseases. So when we look at the results, they're real simple. We signed the Treaty of Paris, 1898. Cuba actually gains their independence, but who do they have to listen to now? And that is the United States. And we'll deal with the Platt Amendment later on. U.S. actually gives Spain $20 million so we can control the Philippines. Guerrilla war will ensue, and we will actually gain control of the Philippines. Spain ceded Puerto Rico and Guam to the United States. So ceded, if you forgot that term, they gave it up. So Puerto Rico became an American protectorate. Guam became an American island where we built a naval base. And really, in the end, after the Spanish-American War, the United States is recognized as a true world power. So I hope this helped you. And once again, if you need anything, go back and watch it. These are the causes and results of the Spanish-American War. See you next time.